a wealthy and self-important businessman. He lost his fiancée to another man, and to avoid showing vulnerability, he hatches a bold plan that will shock you. Before the story begins, let us know in the comments which city you're tuning in from. Enjoy the tale, everyone. James Harper is a millionaire accustomed to having the world at his fingertips, but this time he found himself staring at a wedding invitation from his ex-fiancée, Emily, to another man. The sting of loss was sharp, but as always, James refused to show any sign of weakness. He needed a plan to prove to everyone, especially Emily, that he was unfazed. Suddenly, his gaze fell on Sarah, his housekeeper, who was tidying up papers in the room. Sarah was young, attractive, and had a natural charm that could be perfect for his scheme. "Sarah, come here," he said in a commanding tone. Sarah hesitated but set aside her tasks and approached. "Do you need something, Mr. Harper?" she asked, as courteous as ever. "Yes, I need you to accompany me to an event." "It's personal," he replied. The request sounded bizarre. Sarah looked at him with a mix of surprise and confusion. "Mr. Harper, I'm your housekeeper, not a date," she said. James chuckled briefly, as if her reaction was expected. "I'm not asking, Sarah. I'm offering an opportunity. You'll be well compensated. All you need to do is accompany me, look stunning, and keep the conversation minimal." Sarah felt a knot in her throat. As offensive as the idea was, the amount James mentioned was hard to resist. Having worked for him for nearly 2 years, she knew how to handle his domineering ways, but never anticipated something like this. She thought about her mounting bills and the course she wanted to enroll in. "Why me?" she dared to ask. James gave her a direct look. "Because you're uncomplicated, discreet," and he paused for a moment, "different from everyone who will be there." The answer felt like a backhanded compliment, but Sarah swallowed her pride. "All right, I'll do it," she said after a pause. "But just for one night." James smiled, satisfied. "Excellent. We have a lot to prepare." As Sarah left the room, a nagging doubt filled her mind. What consequences would come from agreeing to this arrangement with such an unpredictable man? The next morning, Sarah barely had time to process what she had agreed to. James had already taken charge. A luxury car arrived at her door to pick her up, taking her directly to an upscale boutique in the city center. As soon as she entered, she was greeted by a stylist who seemed as intimidating as James. "Miss Sarah, we're going to transform you," the woman announced with a critical eye. As attendants brought out dresses, shoes, and accessories, Sarah felt like she was on a makeover reality show. Each piece chosen seemed to highlight how far removed James's world was from hers. She tried to refuse the high heels she could barely walk in, but her objections were ignored. James arrived shortly after, scrutinizing everything with a critical eye. "She needs to look sophisticated, but not artificial," he declared as the stylist nodded. Sarah crossed her arms, uncomfortable. "Maybe I could choose something that makes me feel comfortable?" "Comfortable?" James let out a short laugh. "This isn't about comfort, Sarah. It's about making an impression." The response made her blood boil, but Sarah knew there was no point in arguing. Accepting this deal meant playing by his rules, at least for now. After hours of fittings and adjustments, James finally approved an elegant black dress that accentuated Sarah's natural beauty. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. For a brief moment, she felt powerful. "Now this is it," James said, examining her as if she were a finished masterpiece. "All this seems a bit excessive," Sarah commented hesitantly. James turned to her, his gaze steady. "Emily can't have any doubt that you are my choice." The mention of his ex-fiancée hung in the air, a silent reminder of the reason behind all this. The next day, James hired an etiquette coach to train Sarah to act like someone from high society. For hours, she was instructed on how to walk, smile, and even hold a champagne glass. The effort exhausted her, but also frustrated her. "I can hold a glass without help," she protested. After dropping one for the 3rd time, James, observing from a distance, simply shook his head. "You're here to impress, not to be average." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "And why is all this so important to you, James? You already have everything: money, power, respect." For a moment, he seemed caught off guard by the question, but quickly regained his composed demeanor. Some things can't be bought, Sarah. Let's just say this is personal. The answer didn't satisfy her, but she decided not to press further. It was clear there was more to the story than he was letting on. On the night before the wedding, James appeared with a more serious expression than usual. Tomorrow, all eyes will be on us. Leave no room for doubts or mistakes. Sarah stared at him, exhausted from the constant training and endless demands. James, why does this matter so much to you? Emily is just your ex. He gave a cold smile. Emily isn't just my ex. She's the only person who challenged me and thought she could replace me. Sarah realized that behind James's confident facade were insecurities he worked hard to conceal. This wasn't just about Emily. It was about wounded pride, control, and the need to prove no one could surpass him. So, this is all just about feeding your ego, she asked, challenging him. James narrowed his eyes. I don't expect you to understand, Sarah. Just stick to the plan. The tension between them was palpable, but Sarah chose not to prolong the argument. She knew that whatever happened, her patience was about to be tested like never before. On the morning of the wedding, Sarah got ready with the help of a team James had hired. Her hair was flawless, her makeup perfect, and the dress looked like something out of a fairy tale. When she saw herself in the mirror, for a moment, she forgot everything, the plan, James, Emily. She felt different, confident. James found her just before they left. He was dressed in an impeccable suit, and for the first time, Sarah noticed that despite his unbearable personality, he was strikingly handsome. You look adequate, he said, trying to sound indifferent, though Sarah caught the faint smile on his lips. Thanks, I think, she replied with a touch of sarcasm. In the car on the way to the wedding, silence filled the space between them. Sarah tried to hide the nervousness she felt. She was about to step into a world that wasn't hers, next to a man who seemed incapable of genuine emotion. When they arrived at the venue, James looked at her one last time before stepping out of the car. Remember, Sarah, today you're my partner. Act like you were born for this. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. I don't need to act, James. I just need to survive this. As soon as Sarah stepped out of the car, whispers began. All eyes at the wedding were on her and James. The elegant black dress that hugged her curves and the confident posture she had practiced for hours seemed to work. James walked beside her with the same air of superiority he always carried. But this time, there was something more: pride. Sarah quickly realized she was in unfamiliar territory. The guests were a mix of powerful businessmen, socialites, and a few minor celebrities. Emily, the bride, stood in the distance laughing with a group of friends. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. It wasn't fear, but a sense of being out of place, surrounded by people who lived in a completely different reality. Don't let anyone intimidate you, James whispered in her ear as if reading her thoughts. Sarah kept her head high as they walked toward the reception. Soon, they were approached by an older man with a broad smile. James, I didn't expect to see you here, and with such a charming companion, the man said. James shook the man's hand. Of course I came, George. After all, Emily and I have history. The comment made Sarah raise an eyebrow, but she stayed silent, forcing a polite smile. As dinner began, Sarah noticed that James was incredibly skilled at maintaining shallow conversations while exuding an air of superiority. She, on the other hand, did her best to keep up. At one point, Emily finally approached them, her smile as sharp as her gleaming white dress. James, what a surprise, she said, looking Sarah up and down. And who's your friend? Before James could respond, Sarah extended her hand. Sarah, it's a pleasure to meet you, Emily, Sarah said confidently. The bride seemed taken aback by Sarah's poise, but shook her hand. The pleasure is mine. I didn't expect James to bring someone so charming. Clearly annoyed by Emily's tone, James stepped in. Sarah has been an incredible companion. She understands me in ways few people ever could. Emily narrowed her eyes, studying Sarah as if searching for flaws in her polished demeanor. How interesting. We should talk later. Sarah, I'd love to get to know more about you. Sarah nodded, but she knew that invitation wasn't as innocent as it seemed. As the night progressed, Sarah felt more and more out of place. There were whispers, sideways glances, and some women openly mocking her behind her back. She tried to focus on the promise she had made to herself: get through the night and leave with her dignity intact. During the dance, James approached and extended his hand. "You're doing well. Now we need to dance." "Dance? I don't," she hesitated, but he was already pulling her onto the floor. "Trust me," he said, holding her hand firmly. To her surprise, James danced with elegance, guiding her as if it were second nature. Sarah stumbled a few times but soon found her rhythm. During the dance, she felt his eyes fixed on hers, and for a moment, she forgot everything around her. "You're doing better than I expected," James commented, breaking the silence. Sarah laughed, trying to hide her nervousness. "And you dance better than I imagined." Their exchange was interrupted when Emily approached. "James, may I steal your date for a moment?" James seemed to hesitate but nodded. "Sure, don't take too long." Sarah followed Emily to a more secluded corner. The bride wore a calculated smile, and Sarah knew the moment of truth had arrived. "So, Sarah," Emily began, crossing her arms, "what's your story? Where did James find you?" "Sorry, I don't understand the question," Sarah responded, staying calm. "Oh, you understand." Emily stepped closer. "He's always been good at choosing pieces on the board. You seem convenient." Sarah felt her blood boil but didn't show it. "I think James should answer for his choices." The direct response surprised Emily, who laughed softly. "Well, he always liked challenges. Good luck, dear." Sarah returned to the table, feeling uneasy but trying to hide it. James immediately noticed something was wrong. "What did Emily say?" he asked, looking concerned. "Nothing I couldn't handle," Sarah replied, not giving details. Later, during the speeches, Sarah noticed that James was uncomfortable. While everyone praised Emily and her new husband, he seemed distant, his jaw tense. When their eyes met, Sarah gave a small smile, trying to lighten the moment. James looked away, but seemed less rigid. "Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type chocolate in the comments. Only those who get this far will understand. Now, let's continue with the story." When the event finally ended, James and Sarah said goodbye to the guests. On the way to the car, he finally broke the silence. "You did better than I expected." "Thanks, I think," Sarah replied. "No, I mean it," he hesitated, as if not knowing how to finish the sentence. "You were perfect." Sarah didn't know how to respond, but felt a strange warmth in her chest. Despite all of James's arrogance and control, there were moments like that which made her question who he really was. But before she could think more about it, she knew something had changed that night, and the consequences were just beginning. Sarah woke up the next day, still absorbing the events of the wedding. The night had been a whirlwind of emotions, and although she had managed to impress, there was something unsettling about James's behavior. He seemed to be stuck in a cycle of pride and insecurity that made him unstable, especially when Emily was around. James, for his part, wasted no time getting back to his routine. That morning, he was already in a meeting with potential investors. However, the whispers about his appearance with Sarah at the wedding spread quickly. Some guests, especially close friends of Emily, questioned who that woman was. Emily, seizing the opportunity, started to fuel the rumors. In a conversation with an influential investor, she hinted that Sarah might be more than she appeared. James has always had a peculiar taste for allies. "Is she there on merit or convenience?" she said with a malicious tone. The rumor grew, and it wasn't long before one of the investors approached James directly during a lunch. "Your date at the wedding? Sarah, right? She seems very determined. Something tells me she has ambitions beyond you." James, already irritated by Emily's provocations, felt the comment hit his pride. He knew Sarah wasn't a threat, but his own insecurity, combined with what he had heard that morning, made him overreact. That afternoon, Sarah was called into James's office. As soon as she entered, she sensed the tense atmosphere. He was sitting behind his desk, eyes fixed on some papers, but his expression was harsh. "You wanted to see me?" Sarah asked, trying to stay calm. James looked up. "Yes, we need to clear a few things up." She stepped closer, bracing herself for the worst. "What's going on?" James tossed some papers onto the table. "These rumors about you speaking to investors at the wedding. What exactly did you say to them?" Sarah was stunned. "Speaking to investors? I didn't talk to anyone except Emily and a few people who approached me. And what exactly did you discuss? He pressed, his voice laced with suspicion. Sarah felt her blood boil. James, all I did was act exactly as you asked. I was by your side the whole time, except when Emily wanted to talk to me. He stood, slamming his hands on the table. So, it was Emily. Of course she'd try something, and you fell right into her trap. Sarah crossed her arms, incredulous. You're blaming me for something I don't even know happened? You went too far, he said, ignoring her attempts to explain. I trusted you with a simple task, but apparently you can't help but draw more attention than you should. The accusation hit Sarah hard. Are you saying my presence hurt you? You're the one who put me in this position. James took a deep breath, trying to maintain control, but his anger seemed to take over. Sarah, I think it's best if we end this here. Consider yourself dismissed. Sarah froze for a moment. Dismissed? Are you firing me? That's right. It's clear our dynamic no longer works. The words were a slap in the face. Sarah felt her pride clash with indignation, but she realized arguing with James would be pointless. Fine, if that's your decision, I'll accept it. But know this, James. You're making a huge mistake. She turned and walked out of the room with her head held high, but inside she was devastated. It wasn't just about losing the job. It was about the way he treated her, discarding her like she was insignificant. The following days were tough for Sarah. Despite her anger, she knew she needed to bounce back. Without the job, her savings wouldn't last long. But instead of feeling defeated, she decided to use the situation as fuel to turn her life around. Sarah began working on a project she'd long had in mind, sustainable decor. Using recycled materials and her creativity, she created a small collection of pieces that quickly caught attention on social media. Within weeks, her work began to gain visibility and orders started pouring in. Meanwhile, James faced increasing pressure in his company. The insecurity caused by Emily's presence and the rumors from the wedding continued to undermine his credibility. Though he wouldn't admit it, he found himself thinking about Sarah often. There was something about her, the determination he saw in her eyes when she left the room, that he couldn't forget. One morning, while reviewing financial reports, James received an email that caught him off guard. It was an article on a design website praising the work of a new entrepreneur, Sarah. He clicked the link and saw photos of her creations. The pieces were innovative, full of personality, and reflected exactly who she was. For a moment, he felt a mix of admiration and unease. Sarah was thriving on her own without relying on anyone, while his own life felt increasingly out of control. That evening, James attended a business event but felt distant. During a conversation, he overheard someone mention Sarah's name again. It was as if, no matter how much he tried, he couldn't escape her influence. He decided he needed to see her. Meanwhile, Sarah was working tirelessly to grow her business. The pain and wounded pride she'd felt after being dismissed by James had turned into motivation. Sarah knew she didn't need his validation or anyone else's to succeed. But when she heard the sound of a message on her phone, her heart nearly stopped. It was from James. Sarah stared at James's message for a few seconds, her heart racing. After weeks of silence, there he was, wanting to talk. But why? What did he want after discarding her so easily? Determined not to let it affect her, Sarah ignored the message and focused back on her work. The small studio she had set up in her living room was beginning to feel too small. Orders for her sustainable decor pieces were growing daily, and she could barely keep up with the demand. It was exhausting, but it also made her feel like she was finally in control of her life. Meanwhile, James couldn't concentrate. Sarah had turned down his attempt to reach out, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He tried to justify his growing interest in her as mere curiosity. After all, it wasn't common for someone he fired to leave his orbit and succeed on their own. But there was something more. He couldn't forget the look in her eyes during their last conversation when she stood up to him with such courage and determination. It was a complete contrast to the people around him, always flattering or interested only in what he could offer. Sarah was different, and that intrigued him. "Mr. Harper," his assistant said, interrupting his thoughts. The investor you mentioned wants to schedule a meeting. James nodded distractedly. Yes, sure. Schedule it for tomorrow. But his mind was still on Sarah. He decided he needed to see her, face to face. Not to apologize, that wasn't something he did easily, but to understand how she had bounced back so quickly. The next morning, Sarah was organizing a new batch of orders when she heard a knock at the door. Her heart raced when she saw James on the other side. She took a deep breath before opening it. What are you doing here? She asked, crossing her arms. James was as impeccable as always, but there was something softer in his expression. We need to talk, Sarah. She let out a short, humorless laugh. You've made it clear what you think of me, James. I don't see what we have to discuss. I was wrong, he said, surprising her. About a lot of things. Sarah raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Is this an attempt to apologize? He hesitated but nodded. In a way, yes. I was impulsive and unfair to you. Impulsive and unfair? She repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You accused me of something I didn't do. Humiliated me and fired me without even listening to me. James lowered his gaze, clearly uncomfortable. I know. I was a jerk. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. Why are you here, James? Do you want to hire another pawn for your selfish plans? He shook his head, frustrated. No, that's not it. I saw what you're doing, Sarah. Your work. It's amazing. I had to see you and what? She interrupted. Want to take credit for my success now. James stepped back, as if her words had struck him. No, I just wanted to say I admire what you've done. You got back up even after what I did. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her for a moment. She watched him, trying to understand what he wanted. James, the man who always seemed so confident, now stood before her with an expression she had never seen before. Vulnerability. Admiration doesn't change anything, James, Sarah said firmly. I built this on my own without anyone's help, and you were just an obstacle I had to overcome. He nodded, accepting her words. I know, but I hope one day you'll forgive me. Sarah didn't respond. She just closed the door, leaving James outside. In the following days, Sarah threw herself into her work, trying to forget the encounter with James. But no matter how hard she tried, he kept invading her thoughts. The way he seemed genuinely sorry was something she hadn't expected. James, on the other hand, was determined to make amends. He started researching more about Sarah's work and realized the positive impact she was having with her creations. Inspired by her, he decided to use his influence to support sustainable projects, something he had never considered before. In a meeting with a group of investors, he presented a proposal to fund small entrepreneurs with innovative ideas. We need more projects that make a difference, he said, surprising even himself. Meanwhile, Sarah received an unexpected invitation to showcase her work at a local design event. It was her first opportunity to present her creations to a larger audience, and she was nervous but excited. On the night of the event, while arranging her pieces, she felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned around and found James. What are you doing here? She asked, surprised. I came to support you, he replied sincerely. And before you say anything, I'm not here to steal your moment. Sarah crossed her arms, still skeptical. Why? Because I believe in you, he said simply. The words, though unexpected, didn't seem hollow. Sarah watched James for a moment, trying to find any sign that he had other intentions. But all she saw was honesty. You're persistent, James, she said finally. But I still don't know if I can trust you. He gave a small smile. I don't expect you to trust me. I just hope for a chance to show that I can be better. The event was a success. Sarah received compliments and proposals from new clients, and although reluctant, she couldn't deny that James's presence helped draw attention to her work. As the night came to an end, he approached her again. If you ever need help expanding your business, know that I'm willing to invest, he said. Sarah shook her head. I don't need your money, James. If I ever accept your help, it'll be because I trust you, not because I depend on it. James nodded, respecting her decision. Then I'll work to earn your trust. For the first time, Sarah saw something different in James. Maybe, just maybe, he was genuinely changing. The showcase was a milestone in Sarah's life, Not just because of the opportunities it brought, but also because it was the first time she felt the impact of her work beyond social media. Yet, James's unexpected support still left her confused. She tried not to think about him, but somehow he seemed determined to be part of her journey again. In the following days, Sarah was busy with new orders and invitations to collaborate with local designers. Still, the encounter with James at the event lingered in her mind. He had shown a kindness she'd never seen before. But she knew that with James, kindness alone wasn't enough to erase the past. While working on a new collection, her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Hello. Sarah, this is Emily from Urban Deco Designs. We'd like to invite you to lead a project in collaboration with a high-profile company. Your work is exactly what we're looking for." Sarah could hardly believe it. Urban Deco Designs was one of the top sustainable design firms known for partnerships with major brands. "I'd love to. Which company is it?" "It's Harper Enterprises." The name made her heart stop for a moment. Of course it was. The irony was almost cruel. I need to think about it," she replied, trying to sound professional. "We understand, but this could be a great opportunity for you to expand your reach. Please consider it and let us know by tomorrow." Sarah hung up, trying to process the situation. Working with James meant facing everything she was trying to move past, but the opportunity was too big to ignore. The next morning, Sarah made her decision and sent Emily a message confirming her participation. A few hours later, she received project details and a request for a meeting at Harper Enterprises headquarters. When she arrived at the towering building, she felt a mix of nerves and determination. She wasn't there to rekindle personal ties. She was there as a professional. She took the elevator, heart racing, and was greeted by an assistant who led her to the meeting room. As soon as she walked in, she saw James. He was standing by a table covered with reports, but his gaze went straight to Sarah. For a moment, he looked surprised, but then he smiled. "Welcome, Sarah." She maintained her composure. "I'm here for the project, James. Let's keep it focused on that." He nodded, seeming to respect the boundaries she set. "Of course, I want you to see this as a partnership. Your ideas will be critical." Sarah stood at the center of the conference room, presenting the progress of her ideas for the sustainable building. The project had advanced remarkably, and the confidence she had earned from the team and investors was evident. Every detail she proposed was met with praise, and even those who initially underestimated her were convinced of her vision. James, sitting at the head of the table, watched her silently. He rarely interfered in Sarah's presentations now, but he made sure to show support. His eyes were fixed on her, but not just for her professionalism. There was something more. When the meeting ended, Sarah felt James's familiar presence approaching. "You're doing an amazing job," he said as they walked down the hallway. "Thank you," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. James hesitated before continuing. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night about success and who you share it with." Sarah stopped, turning to face him. "James, I'm here to work. Don't mix things up." He shook his head, as if trying to control something he really wanted to say. "Right, but someday, maybe you'll understand what I'm trying to show." Sarah didn't respond. She just walked away, ignoring the strange feeling his words provoked. As the project neared its final stage, Sarah started to notice something unusual in the financial reports. Some budget decisions seemed contradictory to the sustainability message James emphasized so much. It wasn't something she could ignore. That same afternoon, she went directly to his office. "James, can we talk?" she asked. He looked up from his computer, surprised by her direct tone. "Sure, what's going on?" Sarah placed the papers on his desk. "These numbers don't make sense. How can we talk about sustainability when we're cutting essential costs for it?" James took the reports and reviewed them in silence. "I'll check this with the finance department," he said, but Sarah sensed hesitation in his voice. "You knew about this, didn't you?" she asked, her voice full of frustration. He put down the papers and took a deep breath. "It wasn't an easy decision, Sarah, but we need to balance the budget." Sarah stared at him, incredulous. "You're sacrificing the integrity of the project to please investors?" "It's not that simple," James replied, looking uncomfortable. "I have responsibilities, And I have principles, Sarah retorted firmly. If you don't believe in what you're doing, then this project will never be genuine. James remained silent, visibly shaken by her words. That night, Sarah decided she needed answers. James had always been a complicated man, but there was something deeper about his behavior recently. She started looking into the background of some companies involved in the project and found that most had long-standing ties to James and his father. The next day, she confronted him again. James, why are you so invested in this project? It's not just about sustainability, is it? He looked away, as if trying to avoid the question. It doesn't matter now. It does, Sarah insisted. If you want my trust, you need to be honest with me. James finally relented, closing his eyes for a moment before speaking. This project is a way to make up for what my father did. He always prioritized profit above everything else, and it hurt a lot of people. I grew up thinking that was the only way, but I don't want to repeat his mistakes. Sarah listened in silence, absorbing his words. For the first time, she saw James as someone vulnerable, someone battling his own past. Then do things differently, she finally said. Show that you can be better. In the days that followed, James took steps to adjust the budget, even though he knew it might deter some investors. Sarah noticed he was genuinely trying to change, but there was still a barrier she couldn't break through. Let's have a little fun with the readers in the comments. Type milkshake if you've made it this far. Now let's get back to the story. As they worked together, the two began sharing more than just project ideas. Sarah opened up about her humble childhood, the challenges of supporting her family, and her dream of using her creativity to make a meaningful impact. James, in turn, spoke about the pressure of growing up in his father's shadow, the failure of his relationship with Emily, and how meeting Sarah had shifted his perspective on many things. You made me realize that success means nothing if you lose the people who truly matter, he admitted during a break from work. Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. James, change takes time. It's not enough to say you'll be different. You have to prove it. He nodded. And I will. At an event to showcase the project's progress, Sarah was approached by Emily, who seemed to attend every opportunity to cross paths with James. Looks like you've gained more than just a job, Emily said with a sly smile. Sarah took a deep breath, staying calm. I've worked hard to earn my place, Emily. Maybe you should try doing the same. Emily laughed, as if Sarah's response amused her. James can be charming when he wants to be, but in the end, he always reverts to what he is, a man driven by his ego. Good luck trying to change that. Sarah didn't respond, but Emily's words unsettled her. No matter how much effort James was making, doubts lingered. Those doubts deepened when James approached her shortly afterward, concern in his eyes. Are you okay? He asked. Emily has a special talent for being unpleasant, Sarah replied, trying to play it off. James sighed. Don't let her get to you. She's always looking for ways to hurt me, and now she thinks targeting you is the way to do it. And why? Sarah challenged, locking eyes with him. Why does she think I'm important to you? James was silent for a moment before answering. Because you are. The words were simple but carried weight. Sarah didn't know what to say. James seemed intent on making his feelings clear, but she wasn't ready to trust him yet. In the following days, Sarah focused on her work, but James's words stayed with her. He had been clear, she was important to him. While his intentions seemed genuine, Sarah knew she couldn't rely on words alone. She wanted to believe him, but her instincts kept her cautious. As the project progressed, a major presentation event was scheduled to bring together investors, partners, and industry leaders. It was a crucial moment to solidify Sarah's hard work and secure the financial backing needed for the final phase. She prepared meticulously, knowing the night would be pivotal. James, meanwhile, was closer than ever. He not only trusted her decisions, but also supported her in every detail. At times, Sarah caught him looking at her during meetings, but she avoided addressing it. Their balance was delicate, and Sarah knew that one wrong step could destabilize everything. On the night of the event, Sarah arrived at the stunning venue in a simple, yet elegant dress that reflected her personality. The guests were excited to see the presentation, and she struggled to stay calm as she mentally reviewed the details. James arrived shortly after, impeccably dressed as always, but with a more relaxed demeanor than usual. He approached Sarah as soon as he saw her. "You look amazing," he said, in a tone that seemed to slip from his usual composure. "Thank you," she replied, trying to keep the conversation casual. Before they could continue, Emily appeared with a smile that barely hid her intent to provoke. "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise," she said as her eyes scanned the room. "It seems you've really found your place here." "I worked hard for it," Sarah replied, refusing to be intimidated. Emily turned to James. "And you, James? Still trying to prove something to me?" James stayed calm, but his tone was firm. "Emily, I have nothing to prove to you, and Sarah doesn't need your approval to be here." Sarah watched the exchange with a mix of satisfaction and discomfort. James had taken her side publicly, but the confrontation with Emily seemed to rekindle old wounds. As the event progressed, Sarah presented her vision for the final phase of the project. The room fell silent as she explained how every detail was designed to reflect the values of sustainability and innovation. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause. James was the first to stand, followed by the investors and partners. Sarah felt a surge of pride, but she also knew the night was far from over. During the cocktail hour following the presentation, Emily once again tried to steal the spotlight. This time, however, she approached one of the investors and began making insinuations about James's past. "He's always been good at charming people, but commitment has never been his strong suit," she said in a casual tone, but loud enough for Sarah to hear. Sarah decided not to intervene. She knew James didn't need her defense, but Emily's words seemed to plant doubt in the minds of some investors. Shortly after, one of the men approached James. "Harper, it seems like you're changing your approach. The public support for Sarah was impressive, but considering your history, is this really sincere?" James narrowed his eyes, clearly irritated. "My support for Sarah is based on her talent and work. If that's not enough to convince you, maybe it's time to reconsider our partnerships." James's firm tone silenced the man, but Sarah, watching from a distance, saw that it had affected him more than he let on. When the night ended, Sarah found James outside, looking at the horizon with a tired expression. "It was an intense night," she said, approaching. "That's an understatement," he replied with a small smile. "You were amazing." "Thank you." But what Emily said didn't help at all. James sighed, his shoulders heavy. "Emily knows how to hit where it hurts. She can't stand the idea that I'm trying to change." Sarah hesitated before responding. "And are you?" James looked at her, his expression serious. "I am, but not for her." There was a moment of silence between them before James continued. "Sarah, when I fired you, I thought I was protecting myself, but all I did was push away the only person who made me question who I really was. You showed me that there's a different way." His words were full of emotion, and Sarah felt her own barriers begin to weaken. "James, change isn't just about words. It's about actions." "Then let me show you," he said, his voice firm. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part was still stuck in the past. "We'll see," she said finally. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at the company changed. James started implementing bolder measures, like partnerships with sustainable organizations and cutting ties with suppliers that didn't align with the project's values. Sarah saw that he was indeed trying to turn his words into actions. One afternoon, while they were reviewing the final details of the presentation, James did something that caught her by surprise. "Sarah, I need you to know that no matter what happens between us, this project was only possible because of you." She looked at him, trying to find any hint of insincerity in his words, but found none. "Thank you," she replied genuinely. James hesitated before continuing. "I know there's still a lot I need to prove to you, but if you let me, I want to try." Sarah knew James's intentions seemed genuine, but something still held her back. Maybe it was the fear of getting hurt again, or maybe it was just caution. The final days of the project were a mix of excitement and exhaustion for Sarah. She had dedicated months to the work, but now, with the launch approaching, she realized it wasn't just a professional milestone, it was a personal turning point. James had changed, or at least he seemed to have. Yet, Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to trust him again. The launch was set to be a grand event covered by the media and attended by international investors and industry figures. As usual, James took on the role of host, but he insisted Sarah be by his side. "You're the soul of this project," he said during one of their final meetings. "I want everyone to know that." Sarah agreed, but with one condition. "As long as it's clear my role here was earned on merit, I'm not here to be associated with your past or your mistakes." James nodded, understanding her resolve. "Agreed. You've earned this entirely on your own." On the morning of the event, Sarah arrived early to check the final details. The building looked flawless, reflecting everything she had envisioned: elegance, functionality, and sustainability. As she walked through the halls, she felt a mix of pride and anxiety. James arrived shortly after, dressed impeccably in a suit. He seemed confident, but there was something else in his expression, a hint of vulnerability Sarah couldn't ignore. "Nervous?" he asked as he approached. "A little," she admitted. "And you?" "Always," he replied with a smile, "but having you here makes it easier." Sarah looked away, trying to avoid the weight of his words. There was something different about James that day, a lightness she hadn't seen before. The event began with speeches and presentations highlighting the project's innovative aspects. Sarah was invited to the stage to share her vision and how she had turned ideas into reality. She was nervous, but as she glanced at the audience, she saw James in the front row, his face filled with genuine pride. "This project isn't just about sustainability," she said, concluding her speech. "It's about showing that when we work together and believe in the impact we can make, we can create something truly meaningful." The audience erupted in applause, but it was James's gaze that stayed with her. After the presentations, a reception was held, and Sarah found herself surrounded by people eager to learn more about her work. She answered every question with patience, but her attention kept drifting to James, who was across the room speaking with a group of investors. When she finally had a moment alone, Emily appeared as usual at the least convenient time. "Well, Sarah, it seems you've managed to impress. Congratulations." "Thank you," Sarah replied, keeping her composure. "But tell me," Emily continued, her tone dripping with subtle malice, "do you really think James has changed? Or is he still playing the same game?" Sarah didn't answer right away. There was something calculated about Emily's tone, as if she wanted to sow doubt. "It's not your judgment that matters," Sarah said at last. "It's mine." Emily gave a quiet laugh but didn't reply. She simply walked away, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. Shortly after, James approached her. "Emily's trying to poison your thoughts again, isn't she?" Sarah sighed. "It's not that. She just made me realize I still have doubts." James was silent for a moment before responding. "I understand. And honestly, I'd have doubts too if I were in your place." Sarah looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "Have you really changed, James? Or is this just another attempt to manipulate everything around you?" "I have changed," he said firmly, "but I don't expect you to believe me just because I say so. I want to prove it over time." Sarah didn't reply, instead looking away as she tried to sort through her feelings. The evening continued, but Sarah's discomfort grew. There was something she couldn't quite define, a knot in her chest that refused to loosen. When the event ended, James walked her to the exit. "Thank you for everything, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "This project wouldn't have been possible without you." She nodded, but his words didn't ease her concerns. "It was good work, James, but that doesn't mean everything's resolved." He smiled, though there was a touch of sadness in his eyes. "I know." In the days that followed, Sarah tried to return to her routine, but she couldn't stop thinking about James. He was keeping his promises. His actions showed he was trying to be better. But Sarah still struggled with the fear of letting herself believe. One morning, Sarah received an unexpected message from James. "Asterisk, I want you to see something. Can you come to the building today?" Asterisk. Sarah hesitated before responding, but her curiosity won. When she arrived, James greeted her in the lobby. He seemed nervous, something rare to see. "What do you want to show me?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Come with me," he said, leading her to the building's terrace. When they arrived, Sarah was speechless. The space had been transformed into a lush garden with native plants and a relaxation area that looked like something out of a dream. I wanted this project to have something special, James explained. Something that represents what I've learned working with you. Sarah turned to him, still absorbing what she saw. This is amazing, James. Thank you. But this isn't just about the project, he said, his voice softening. It's about you. Sarah felt her heart race. James, I know I still have a long way to go, he said, interrupting her. But I want to walk this path with you, if you'll let me. His words were direct, without the calculated tone she feared. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling her internal barriers begin to crumble. Maybe I can give it a chance, she said finally, but that doesn't mean it will be easy. James smiled, a genuine smile full of hope. Nothing worthwhile is easy, Sarah. The partnership between Sarah and James seemed stronger than ever, but Sarah remained cautious. That moment on the terrace had been symbolic, but she knew trust couldn't be rebuilt in a single day. James, on the other hand, seemed determined to show that his transformation was genuine. The following weeks were intense. The project was gaining more recognition, and Sarah was constantly invited to events, interviews, and new partnerships. James made sure that all the credit went to her, highlighting her talent and dedication whenever he had the chance. However, something still bothered her. James was trying too hard, as if he were trying to make up for years of mistakes in just a few weeks. Sarah didn't know if this was due to genuine regret or just an attempt to impress her. One day, James asked Sarah to accompany him to a meeting with new investors. I don't want to present anything without you, he said. Sarah hesitated but agreed. The meeting took place in an elegant restaurant, and the investors were influential people interested in supporting more sustainable projects. Sarah presented her ideas confidently while James watched her with admiration. When the meeting ended, one of the investors made a comment that caught Sarah by surprise. James, you found a real gem. I don't see this passion and authenticity often. James smiled. Yes, she's unique. The compliment was genuine, but Sarah couldn't help feeling uncomfortable. She didn't want to be seen as James's discovery, but as someone who had built her own path. Later, when they were in the car, Sarah finally spoke. James, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I want to make something clear. My work and my achievements aren't tied to you. James seemed surprised but quickly nodded. I understand, and I'll make sure everyone knows that. Sarah noticed he was taking her comments seriously, which made her feel more at ease. As they focused on wrapping up the project, an unexpected problem arose. One of the main suppliers was delaying the delivery of materials, putting the opening of a new phase of the building at risk. James, determined to solve the issue, called an emergency meeting with the whole team. We can't let this compromise our deadline, he said firmly. Sarah, any ideas on how to get around this? Sarah analyzed the reports and suggested an alternative solution involving a smaller, more reliable local supplier. It might not be the cheapest option, but it's the most efficient. James didn't hesitate. Make it happen. We'll deal with the additional cost later. The decision was risky, but showed that James was prioritizing the quality and values of the project over profits, something Sarah noticed with admiration. After the crisis, Sarah began to see a more consistent change in James. He was less concerned with his public image and more focused on ensuring the project's success. Small gestures also demonstrated his transformation, sincere compliments to the team, ethical decisions, and even moments when he admitted his own mistakes. One evening, while they were reviewing the final details of the project, James made a confession. Working with you has made me realize something important. Sarah looked at him, curious. What? I spent years trying to meet everyone else's expectations, my father's, my investors, even Emily's. But you never expected anything from me. You just wanted me to be honest with myself. Sarah remained silent, absorbing his words. And are you being honest now? James nodded with a small smile. For the first time, I think I am. The final inauguration of the project was marked by an event that brought together influential figures from various sectors. Sarah and James stood side by side, receiving compliments and praise for their work. The night felt perfect, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was unresolved. In the middle of the event, James pulled her aside to a quieter corner. "Sarah, there's something I've been rehearsing to tell you for days." She looked at him puzzled. "What is it?" James took a deep breath before speaking. "I don't know where I'd be without you. This project, my growth, it all started because you came into my life and made me see the world differently." Sarah felt her heart race. "James, I know I still need to earn your trust," he interrupted. "But more than that, I want you to know how much I admire you. Not just as a professional, but as a person." Sarah was speechless. His words felt sincere, but she still wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of her mistrust. When the event ended, James walked her to her car. "Thank you for standing by my side tonight," he said. Sarah smiled, a shy but meaningful smile. "You're doing well, James, but it's not over yet." He chuckled softly. "I know." As the car drove away, Sarah glanced at James's reflection in the window and realized he truly was trying to change. For the first time, she felt that maybe she could believe in him. In the days that followed, James continued to surprise her. He got involved in social projects, supported young entrepreneurs, and funded sustainable initiatives. Sarah could see he was doing it out of genuine belief, not just to impress her. One afternoon, while working in her studio, she received a message from James. "Asterisk, come to the building. I want to show you something." Asterisk. When she arrived, she found James on the rooftop. He had installed a mural featuring images and stories of people whose lives had been positively impacted by the project. "I thought this would be a good way to remember why we started this," he explained. Sarah's eyes welled up. "It's amazing, James." He looked at her with a sincere smile. "Just like you." As Sarah gazed at the mural, she realized she might finally be ready to trust him again. The days following the project's final event were a mix of calm and reflection for Sarah. The building was officially operational, earning praise from experts in architecture and sustainable design. Her name was now recognized not only locally but also internationally, something she'd never imagined possible. James, on the other hand, seemed more distant. He was focused on new projects and busy with meetings to expand his business. Yet Sarah knew he was intentionally giving her space to make her own decisions. While working in her studio, Sarah received an unexpected invitation to speak at an international conference on sustainable design. The opportunity was too significant to pass up, but it meant being away for a few weeks. Before confirming her attendance, she decided to talk to James. She walked through the reception of Harper Enterprises and went straight to his office. He seemed surprised to see her. "Sarah, what a surprise. Is everything okay?" "Yes," she replied, "but I wanted to tell you something before making a decision." James set his papers aside and gestured for her to continue. "What's on your mind?" "I've been invited to an international conference. It's a chance to expand my brand, but I'll be away for a few weeks." James watched her silently for a moment before smiling. "That's amazing, Sarah. You should go." Sarah felt a wave of relief at his response. "Thank you. I just thought you'd want to know first." James nodded. "I want you to know I'm rooting for you. Always." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Sarah felt a strange warmth in her chest, but kept it to herself. The trip was a milestone in Sarah's career. She met renowned professionals, shared her story, and was invited to collaborate with companies from other countries. As she spoke about her projects, she realized that, even from afar, James's lessons on leadership and vision were present in everything she did. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who made it this far will understand. Now, let's continue with the story. But despite the success, there was a void she couldn't ignore. During silent nights in her hotel room, she thought about James. His words, his actions, and even the way he looked at her seemed to always be on her mind. When she returned to the city, Sarah decided to go straight to the Harper Enterprises building. It was late, but she knew James would probably still be there. When she walked into his office, she found him alone, going over reports. James looked up from the papers and smiled, surprised. "Sarah, I didn't know you'd be back today." "I just got here," she said, closing the door behind her. "But I needed to see you." He stood up immediately, concerned. "Is something wrong?" "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice slightly trembling. I realized something important while I was away. James stayed silent, watching her intently. There was something in his eyes that seemed vulnerable, as if he knew this moment was crucial. What is it? Sarah took a few steps toward him, trying to find the right words. During this trip, I realized how much you've changed, James. I realized that you're no longer the arrogant and distant man I met. And I realized that, no matter how much I tried to fight it, I fell in love with you. The words came out quickly, as if they had waited too long to be said. James stood still for a few seconds as if processing, but then he took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Sarah, you have no idea how long I've waited to hear that, he said, his voice husky with emotion. She tried to speak, but he continued, gently holding her hands. I fell in love with you a long time ago. Since you came into my life, everything changed. You made me want to be a better person, made me see that what I was building before had no meaning if it wasn't for something greater. Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears, but she didn't look away. James, I was afraid to trust, to open up, to get hurt again. But now I don't want to run anymore. Without saying another word, James leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss full of emotion, as if they were putting everything they had held back for so long into it. When they finally pulled away, he smiled at her. Sarah, you've transformed me. Not just as a businessman, but as a person. I want to walk by your side, not just a day, but always. Will you be my girlfriend? Sarah laughed, still emotional, and held his face with her hands. Yes, James, I will. In the months that followed, Sarah and James began to build something they never imagined. A relationship based on trust, respect, and love. James continued to surprise her with small gestures of affection, while Sarah learned to trust him completely. Together, they started to dream big. Sarah expanded her brand, while James delved into social projects and sustainable initiatives, inspired by the values she brought into his life. On a special night, during the opening of a new space they had designed together, James held Sarah's hand as the crowd applauded them. He looked into her eyes and with an emotional smile said, Sarah, you've changed my life in so many ways. I want to build more than just projects with you. I want to build a life. Before she could respond, he knelt down, opening a small box with a simple but elegant ring. Will you marry me? Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but she didn't hesitate. Yes, James. Yes. The wedding was quiet, full of meaning and surrounded only by their closest friends and family. For Sarah and James, it wasn't just the start of a new phase, but confirmation that true love can be born from the most unexpected places. As they watched the horizon on their honeymoon, hand in hand, Sarah felt a peace she had never experienced. She knew the future would bring challenges, but she was ready to face them as long as she had James by her side. Do you think Sarah was right to forgive and marry James? Leave your opinion in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to keep up with all our stories, and check out more exciting stories by clicking here on the end screen.